Hello and welcome to the Bad Dice podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the General's Handbook. I've got my copy right here, and if you're watching the YouTube video, you can actually see the copy in the background. I'm lucky enough to get an early copy for review, and it kind of also ties into the fact that we were brought in, myself and some of the other guys, to do a show on this before and do some play testing, and got to meet the guys behind the General's Handbook. So I'm lucky enough to get my hands on it early for a review of the book. And this is what this episode or YouTube show, if you're watching on YouTube, is going to be all about. So first off, I want to talk a bit about the General's Handbook itself. Now, obviously, everyone in kind of my circle of friends, because I'm a hardcore tournament gamer, some might say, or I used to be. I used to think I used to be, I suppose. A lot of people are mainly interested in the points, but one of the things that's really apparent as you get hold of this book and read through the book, go through all the different aspects of the book, it's actually not just all about that. There's enough stuff in there that if you're not even in the slightest bit interested in points values or any of that, you don't want anyone telling you how to play your games, you want to do what you're doing and have been doing for a long time and carry on that way, then you'll be just fine. There's plenty in this book for you. So I'm going to go down some of the key points of the book, and then we'll come back and readdress and look down in more depth at some of the details of it as well. So what you've got here is basically a complete toolbox of rules that you can combine in any way your gaming group likes, and that's the important thing. If the way your gaming group wants to play, you can use this book to tweak your gaming to suit your group, and I think that's really cool. And there's a couple of aspects of that as well. One of the things I really like is, I think it's on the first couple of pages, there's a spread in there which looks like it's from the old rule books, so the old editions, and anyone playing Age of Sigmar and not having played any of the other editions might not know this. The first few pages in the book just set the tone out for the whole game. It told you what you can and can't do with the rules, and a lot of the time it really went into the fact that it is just a game. They have the most important rules section in there, and this General's Handbook's the same. It tells you that although this is a guide on ways to play, 4 different ways of organising campaigns, lots of different narrative and open gaming rules in there as well, and the full pitch battle point system. Although there is all that in here, if you guys want to do something different, then you're very welcome to, and it really does stress that. So anyone out there, and I've seen a lot of it this week on the social media, people saying, it's going to be the worst thing that happened to the game, and it's not, because this book's got an absolute ton of battle plans and times of wars that you can use and play, and you don't even have to worry about the points. And if your opponent wants to come and count up the points in his army, you can still just put down what you like. And if you do that and your opponent thinks it's over the top or 2 under, you have that discussion the same as you would like now, I suppose, because you haven't got a copy of the book. In a week's time, 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, whenever you're going to be playing this, there's you can figure things out, and this book just gives you a guideline. So enough of that. I suppose I best get into talking about what's actually in the book. So we've got 4 rules for 4 different ways of organising your campaigns. This is Path to Glory, and this is kind of building a war band. So you get your general, you choose a general, and it tells you how you can pick different units to go with your general. You can give yourself extra glory points instead of taking additional units, and you can build your warband up as you're going along. So the more glory you gain, it's basically a race to 10 points in the book to pick a winner. Now, you can make a smaller one if you want, you can make a bigger one, you can change that, but this gives you a guide of how to progress through that campaign. There's also tells you how to take battle plans and join them together. There's a matrix system campaign where you can play a first game, look on the system of what was the result of that game, go on to the next one and take it from there. That's really cool. There's also a ladder system which shows you how to run a competitive league style game, where if you win games you climb the league, if you lose games you move back down. And the other systems are map campaigns similar to the mighty empires of old. So moving on from the campaigns, as we've already talked about the open system, do what you like, that's still in there. There's actually some really cool narrative in the narrative section about how to play big battles using some of the really cool characters. And there's a full battle, Nagash versus Archaon, including a full army list of what's included on both sides. So if you wanted to recreate the exact battle, it tells you how to do that, what units to use, what each player is going to be using on each side, and it's actually pitched at using actually 9 players per game. I think one side has 4 and one side has 5 players. So it's a really clever way of getting all your toys on a table, having a big battle, and also following an exact storyline if you'd prefer, and I quite like that. So into the pitch battle section, and this is kind of the points and additional rules, and there's some really, really nice stuff in here. Before you get into the points, there's actually new rules that apply to all your other games. So rather than just being points and army building section, these are actually going to be able to be used in open play, also your narrative play, and your pitch battle tournament style play. If you want to, you can use them. And these are allegiance abilities, so you're going to be getting allegiance traits, command traits, and artifacts that you can use in any of your games. Now, what that means basically is if you're in a faction, or if you're in an alliance, your chaos, death, order, destruction, you're going to get different bonuses for fighting in those alliances. And then you get your command traits and your artifacts that you can give to your characters in those games as well. So that's really nice. So the allegiance traits, what's cool about them is, you know, when you start looking through the book and thinking you're trying to get all the Easter eggs, new stuff, although the book's brand new and you're always looking for more things, aren't you, more information. So there's a section in there telling you how the allegiance traits apply to the different alliances, but there's also a section telling you how to apply them if you're allegiant to a single faction. So if you've all got the keyword Stormcast Eternals, you can then choose whether you're going to be allegiant to your alliance or whether you are preferring to be Stormcast Eternals. So hopefully down the line we might get some more race-specific or faction-specific abilities, which I think will be very cool. And it's opening up a whole new way to add extra cool stuff to the game going forward, which I think is really nice. Okay, so we've got our new battle traits, our command traits, and our artifacts. Now, the command traits and artifacts, they get given to your characters in your armies, and there's different ways of generating these. You can roll a random dice, or you can pick them. And I think what's cool about choosing them is you can actually build your faction around a trait. So if you see one particular trait that you like the look of and you think, oh, my character, you know, he does this thing and he should have this ability, or he's got this sword and it should be this magic sword, you can then build that into your army and they could fight in a certain way because your general's got this certain ability or item. I think that's a really nice way of doing things. But it does leave it totally open to, if you wanted to randomly generate one, if you're playing a campaign, or maybe tournament games might bring a house rule in future, you got the option to do that as well, and I think that's very cool. So that's the allegiance abilities. Now, obviously, there's points for every war scroll currently in Age of Sigmar. I've been asked a lot if the Silver Tower war scrolls are in the book, and at this time they're not. So it'll be interesting to see how they get added to the release at a later date. But the compendiums are all in there. So if you're playing any of the older games, older armies and compendiums, we've got all the death, destruction, we've got all that stuff in there as well. But then you've got a whole section right at the back on compendium pitch battle profiles. And we've got dark elves, dwarfs, Blatonians, all that sort of stuff's in there. I think I've had a question as well. Tomb Kings are in there as well. So that's quite cool. All the old stuff, it might be dead, but it's not forgotten. So yeah, it really is. If you've got an old army, you're thinking of getting back into the game, you don't have to have the new stuff to play the new points. There's something in there for you as well. Now, in the pitch battle section, there's a really cool box out in the book which explains what you can do if you go to a tournament, and it tells you house rules and tournament and club house rules and how they might apply to your games. And I think this is really nice. So what they're saying to you is, we've got a full tournament system here that you can use, and it's exactly what I'm going to be using at an event that I'm running, because it's easy. You know, I can pick up this book, I can tell my players to read the book and come and play those sort of games. But the next tournament over might think, we want to do something a bit different. We don't like the idea of battle line units. I want to let people bring whatever they like. And there's a section in the book which is explaining that's totally fine. Not only is it fine, you should be encouraged to do it. It's really good to see people having their own house rules, playing in their own way, and not being restricted to one certain set of gameplay and one certain way of playing. So it's nice that they've took the time in a couple of different places in the book. It's not just in one section at the start. The theme throughout the whole book is really do what you like, play what you like. Here's some really cool ways to play that we think are really good and fun. And if you want to do that, great. But you know, it's up to you. It's your hobby. It's your game. Totally play your own way if you want to. Okay, so what we've got next, I suppose I can talk about some of the army selection rules, because this is something that people are really interested in. So one of the big changes and big additions, I should say, is battle line units. Now, what battle line units are basically your core troops from your army. This is what we used to see in previous editions. There's no kind of restrictions on the amount of points you can spend on things. If you're playing a 2,000 point army, you would have to bring at least 3 battle line armies, 3 battle line units. And they've got a nice little chart in the book showing different points levels, different minimum size battle line units. And so you're going to have to bring at least 3 of them. Now, in your alliance, so if you've got a Chaos alliance, there might be a lot of battle line units to choose from. But when you start drilling down into smaller factions, then it becomes very faction related as to what you can bring. So certain units, I think Stormcast have got access to Liberators and Judicators as their battle line units. So you can't bring an army that's just Paladins and Dracoth Riders and things like that anymore. What I've noticed from looking at South Coast GT armies a lot, compared to the General's Handbook rules, I think this might be one of the main things that changes people's lists. The points values are very similar. If you had, say, 150 points of South Coast GT points before, then this will port over fairly easily to the General's Handbook. I've seen people posting online already because they've seen leaked photos and things like that, saying it's very close to ×5. There's a lot of tweaks up and down. I think there's a general trend that monsters are a bit more expensive in the General's Handbook. So the battle line units is one of the biggest things I've seen affect South Coast GT versus General's Handbook points. And South Coast GT is a big event that I've had recently, so it's easy to see the lists online and just do a quick comparison of what people are bringing and using. Now, it's when you look at the rules and the points, you'll see that it's 2,000 points to 100 points. You know, you times it by 20, it's there or thereabouts. There's a bit of similarity. I've noticed a trend that monsters are a bit more expensive in this than they are in the South Coast. But the battle line units, I think, is the one that will be the biggest difference. People might have not had so many battle line units before, and now they've been sort of pushed into the fact that they're going to have to start fielding these units. So that's battle line units. Now, there's a couple of other cool things with regards to army selection. There's now kind of a limit on the amount of monsters and war machines you can bring, capped at 4 in matched play, and there's at least 1 hero. So you've got to have a character or a leader to lead your force, which is very nice, because I know the option to make a unit champion your general was cool, but it's not very fluffy and thematic. So actually being forced to bring a character, I think, is pretty good. Now, the other big question on kind of like rules changes, army list impact, there's the 3 rules of 1, which I think is very cool, and this is going to have one of the biggest impacts on actual playing the game once you're at the table. Now, the 3 rules of 1 are: number 1, you can only attempt to cast a spell once. So if you try and cast Mystic Shield and fail, another wizard can't cast that same spell, which is pretty good. The second rule of 1, 1s always fail, whether it's to hit, to wound, to armor save, always a fail on a 1. And the third rule of 1, any attacks or that can kind of repeat, Ripperdactyl style, hits and wounds that generate extra attacks can only do it once. So those rippers which come out of the sky and have infinite loop of attacks and hits and wounds can only generate 1 extra attack, so you can't keep piling on the attacks. So they're 3, I think the first one in particular, not being able to cast the same spell more than once is a huge change. And there's a couple of reasons why I'm really excited about it. So first off, at the moment, what you find is your wizards just cast Mystic Shield, and then when things get hairy, they cast Arcane Bolt. Now and again, you'll find a good wizard with a good spell, and you'll take that wizard just for that spell. But now I think you might see a bit more variety, or you'll see less wizards in general, because if you've got one wizard and you need Mystic Shield once, that's great. You've lost the ability now to spam Mystic Shield across the army. So you might be more inclined to take either more units, less characters, or more just like beat stick fighty characters. And I think that's probably a positive thing. So I quite like that. Hitting and wounding and armor saves failing on a 1, that's something we've had already in most of the tournament house rules packs. That's a great example. And then the other one, the generating extra hits, I'm pretty like not fussy the way on that. Yes, it's a powerful ability, and yes, it needs capping, but what you find is most people either cap it by making the unit cost a lot of points, or cap it already by stopping the endless infinite loop of attacks spam. So that's one that's generally been dealt with in the house rules. Now, while we're on the subject of house rules, and I talked earlier about the house rules section, measuring to the bases is not in the General's Handbook as a rule, but they do cite that specifically as one of the house rules that a lot of people play to, and they explain that, you know, it might have an impact on the game for measurements and differences like that, but it does mean you don't have to stack your models up on top of each other, and that's a house rule that a lot of people play to. So I think it's quite nice that they fit that in there, and it just goes to show that these house rules are encouraged, so it's a really nice way of doing things. So the next major rule change or difference in the match play section is summoning. Now, the way summoning works is really, I think it's quite nice, quite elegant way of doing things. A lot of the SDK, South Coast GT and Clash packs, it's kind of a little bit convoluted the way they do things, and the way it's done in the General's Handbook is it's simple as you work out your army. So if you're playing 2,000 points, that's great. If you, at the start of the game, you can decide to leave, say, 3, 5, 1,700, whatever points on the side to summon later. And the way you do this is, as you cast a summoning spell, you just, when you deploy that unit, you just deduct them points from what you've got remaining in your summoning pool. And it's as simple as that, really. So if I was playing Death and I wanted to bring a unit of Skeletons on, I don't know the points for Skeletons off the top of my head, but let's say there are 100 points for 10. I don't know if that's right or not. If I'd got a 1,700 point army, I could then summon an extra 30 Skeletons onto the table, and that would count as my summoning pool all spent. Now, I could do this all in one go if the spells are allowing it, or I could do it in dribs and drabs with different spells and working out each unit as I come to them. And that's it, really. It's really simple. Now, I've heard a lot of people saying that it's a nerf to summoning compared to other ways that it's been played already, and it possibly is, you know, having to pay for your points for the units that you're putting on the board. Shock horror, you know, terrible that you've had to pay for it like the rest of us. But in a way, it's also quite cool because those units can't be killed until they're on the table, so you can keep them safe in reserve and then kind of deep strike them where you need them later, which is something I've heard referred to. Some armies make more use of it than others, and there's also things like summoning a horror, which then summons flamers, which can then shoot something, get in line of sight and angles. There's a lot of use for keeping summoning in reserve and bringing them onto the table when you need them. Just simple things like an undead player putting that unit of Skeletons down at a key point just to get in the way of another unit that wanted to charge through a gap in the following turn and do some damage, and now there's a unit of Skeletons there to hold them up where your fragile units might want to retreat. That's just one tactic that I can think of with summoning straight away without drilling down into it too much. And so I quite like the way this has been done, and I think it's a lot easier for management at the table as well, rather than having to work out, well, this unit's this many points and I half it, and that it's a bit simpler to just, you know, these are the points. Now, one thing that I've seen asked as well, do you need to list the units that you're going to be summoning? No, it doesn't say that in the book. I kind of guess that's the house rule that will come in at tournaments. They'll try and make it easier, streamline it a bit, so you don't get undead players turning up with just all the undead and demon players turning up with all the demons. I think you might find that is streamlined with a house rule, but the way it plays in the General's Handbook is just deploy the unit and off you go. So there's one last thing I want to talk about before we wrap this show up, and that's the match play battle plans, because I think these are really nice, and they're certainly the things my gaming group are going to play a lot of, I can see. I also see a lot of tournaments playing a lot. So these are going to be the 6 scenarios, like from the old editions, what you're going to want to learn off by heart, because they're going to be played and played and played. So let's just turn to them. We've got Take and Hold, Blood and Glory, And these two are ones that can actually end the game instantly if you achieve a certain win condition. We've got Escalation and Border War. Now, Escalation, you split your army up into thirds and then bring them onto the board 1, 2, and 3 turns in. So that's quite cool. You also score on the objectives on both of these on each of your turns. So a player controls an objective if at the end of any turn they have more models from their army within 6 of the objective than they are enemy models within 6. So that's one way of scoring on them two, both the same. In the first game, it scores a bit different. You have to have no enemy models within 6 to claim it. And then on the final 2 games, 3 Places of Power and Gift from the Heavens, these are different again. So 3 Places of Power, you've got scoring across the front, across the centre, and Gifts from the Heavens, you've got your objectives showing up randomly during the game, which I think is very cool. I really like that. Now, the way you score in both of these is at the end of each of your turns, you score victory points equal to the current number of turn or current round that you're on. So if you control a meteor on turn 1, then you score 1 point. If you control it on turn 5, then you score 5 points. So I'm not clever enough to figure out how that, turn 5, scoring 5 points, and if you capture 2 of them, that's 10 points. That could be a massive swing later in the game. So I think you'll find it'll be one of those where it's important to set yourself up for a late turn grab, but not let your opponent get a runaway victory early on. And it's going to be interesting to see how they all pan out. So, like my one-day event, there's 3 different types of scenario there, and 2 scenarios for each type. So we'll just pick, probably play 1, 3, 1, 3, and 6, or something like that. I don't know. 1 or 2, 3 or 4, 5 or 6. We won't play 1, 2, 3. So I think that's quite cool. But yeah, overall, the General's Handbook, massive thumbs up. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're not sure whether the book's for you, then I think you're crazy, to be honest. It's every Age of Sigmar player out there will want to get their hands on this book. Points for all your armies. What's nice about that as well is points in the book, this book, instead of in battle tomes, says to me that they've always got options to tweak it down the line, whereas having to tweak all the battle tomes for all the factions could be a nightmare. Whereas changing one General's Handbook and reissuing it with new sets of points in, updated for any battle tomes that are going to be coming out in the future, I think it's a great way of doing things. So I'm really excited about this book. There's tons of battle plans. There's a few times of war in there, campaigns, everything for any player in the game. So it's definitely got a glowing review from me. But I think anyone who's listened to Bad Dice and knows the sort of things that I'm into can kind of guess at that anyway. But definitely go and get it. It's going to be out soon. And if you're into Age of Sigmar, if you're not, if you're running a gaming club and there's players down there who are on the fence, you can take it down and show them. This will get new players into the game, and I'm very excited about the next 6 months in the Age of Sigmar, because this book it's as if a whole new edition's come out. So it's a great time for it to be in the Age of Sigmar at the moment. Well, thank you very much for watching and listening. Check out Bad Dice over at the Bad Dice podcast. That's baddice.co.uk. If you want to ask any questions about the show, you can send me an email, bencurry@Bad Dice Podcast, or you can catch me on any of the social media networks. I'm on pretty much all of them, and it's simple as looking for Bad Dice. And I'm sure you'll find me on there. Well, thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.